homeschooling is, whether it's good or bad, it's very, very powerful, because what it does is it gives parents pretty much like 99% absolute control over their kids. So if you use that power in a helpful and empowering way, it can be amazing. It can be superior to public school, but it also can be the very opposite, which is if those parents want to use that control or power to abuse their kids and keep their kids away from mandatory reporters, anyone that would see what's going on in the family.
The critical component to mind control. Being made over to be clones of the person who's at the top of the pyramid. Interested in this subject because of my own cult involvement. I was recruited in 1974 into a front group of the Moonies.
Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of my podcast, Cults, Culture, and Coercion. And I have with me today a special guest, Ryan Stollar. Ryan and I have served on a nonprofit advisory board for the Child Friendly Faith Project, but this is the first time we're meeting Ryan to talk. I want to say that you consider yourself a child liberation theologian and an advocate for children and abuse survivors. Ryan has written a book called The Kingdom of Children, a Liberation Theology, that we're going to get into momentarily. And you have a very interesting personal experience that we want to unpack, but I'll also add that you were homeschooled. You later co-founded a viral website called Homeschoolers Anonymous that we're going to get into learning about. You've authored the first and comprehensive curricula for child abuse awareness and suicide prevention, tailored to homeschooling families and communities. So you're working on another book on the evangelical homeschooling movement, and you're active on social media. Ryan Stollar, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephen. It's great to be here. I've been following your work for a long time, really admire it. So good to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. So you have degrees, but tell us your story. What was your childhood like, and what has led you on this path to helping children and abuse survivors?
Yeah, so I was raised in a evangelical home. My parents were both very conservative Christians, and I was homeschooled for my whole childhood. So I never went to public or private school. From kindergarten all the way through high school graduation, my parents were the main teachers. My personal experience with homeschooling was a relatively positive one. My parents were pretty dedicated to my education as well as my siblings. And one aspect of that was that I had the opportunity to participate in speech and debate in the homeschooling communities. Speech and debate is really popular. They see it as a way to train and prepare young people for politics or places where they would use power or influence. And so
that's really interesting. Yeah. Can I interrupt and just ask, do you have siblings, or were you raised as an only child?
I do have siblings. I have an older brother, and then I have a younger sister and a younger brother.
So they were homeschooled with you, presumably,
they were.
At the same time. And can I ask where you grew up? What part of the U.S.?
Yeah, I grew up in California, in San Jose. I was raised primarily in California. I lived there till I was 16, and then my family moved up to Oregon, and that's where I finished my homeschool experience. So most of my
thank you. Just to get some framing.
Yeah. So most of my experience was in California, but because of the speech and debate opportunities, which I was pretty good at, and so I had the opportunity in high school to teach other high school students speech and debate. And that experience let me travel around the country. I went to most of the states, teaching other Christian homeschoolers how to speak and debate. And it was during that experience, which lasted several years, that I became increasingly aware that my experience of being homeschooled in California was not the norm, especially as we started to go into some of the more southern states, I started to see very authoritarian and controlling families who were not so dedicated to their children's education. And so
Mm-hmm.
I became good friends and familiar with a lot of young people that their homeschooling experiences were very negative. They experienced abuse and neglect from their parents. They weren't taught well. Some of them, especially the women, when they were girls, were not taught certain school subjects because their parents thought women don't need to learn certain things if they're just going to stay home and raise kids. And so,
Mm-hmm.
as I became increasingly aware of what really was happening in homeschooling, in evangelicalism, I wanted to figure out a way to share those stories.
So I have a few
Yeah.
questions already. So when you were traveling, did your parents go with you, or you were sent with some chaperone? Like, how did that work?
So it was a family, David and Teresa Moon. They started this organization. At the time, it was called Communicators for Christ. And it was the two of them and then their two kids. And then it was about 8 teenagers that would travel around with the Moons in a motorhome. We would go from city to city. We would stay with host families in the local area. And no, we didn't have any parents around. It was just David and Teresa Moon, and then all of us teenagers. Eventually, as their organization and the interest in speech and debate accelerated and grew, they started to more formalize their organization, and they'd have internships, and they had standards of how people are supposed to interact with younger people. And they now have a child protection policy, but back then they had none of those things. So it was
interesting.
It was definitely.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Oops, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, it's definitely a common pattern within evangelicalism where you have organizations that use young people and don't pay them and frame their volunteer work as service or ministry. And it's great for the organization in the long run because they can get a lot of free labor out of it. So
yeah, it's called labor trafficking with children. Exactly. So in your family, were you corporally punished, may I ask?
Yes, we were all spanked. And my experience with that is very significant. My parents they didn't spank us in a way that would be considered, criminally abusive in a state. So it wasn't leaving marks.
They didn't use a paddle or a belt or a whip?
Yeah, they were taught. They were taught how to spank us by, there were teachers in evangelicalism that promote how to raise and train children, and they always include corporal punishment, and they have certain techniques like, you're not
with
supposed
wooden
to make sure that you bring the child to the point of crying, and then at the end they're supposed to apologize with a smile. So there's this whole process. For me, it really kind of created a huge wedge between my parents and I. I was not a well-behaved child. When I was about 4 or 5, I was in speech therapy, unrelated to anything we're talking about, but I was in speech therapy and my speech therapist abused me. And so from a young age, I was acting out. I had gone through this traumatic.
You mean abused you sexually or psychologically?
Sexually.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
To hear that. I just want to say, because I've worked with a lot of people who are raised in very severe Christian evangelical, and they really took to heart the belief that if they spoil the rod, they're going to spoil the child. I did an interview with Monty Mader, who's was raised in a Wyoming farm by a very strict Christian nationalist, family. And she knows the Bible. She was made to like memorize it. And she was explaining that the word rod is incorrect translation. It was actually a staff, and that you can't hit sheep to get them to obey. You have to steer the lead sheep in the direction you want so the other sheep will follow. And it was like, whoa, I always thought that meant a rod and you have to beat the kid to be spiritual, and it's not the meaning at all.
No.
The whole thing is based on a misunderstanding of Hebrew and I guess Greek and Aramaic.
Yeah.
But it's weird. It's certainly child abuse.
Absolutely.
By any psychiatrist who studies trauma, they've all said, you can look at the brains of children who were corporally punished and they are traumatized.
And I'll tell you, like, one aspect of that trauma is that when a parent inflicts corporal punishment, one of the problems with pain or physical pain is the message that it communicates is not necessarily the one that you want it to. And so when I was spanked as a kid, like, it didn't bring me to repentance. It didn't bring about a change in my heart. What it did was make me feel like I need to figure out how to get away with what I did next time without getting caught. And so no matter how much I got spanked, it just made me more and more alienated from my parents. I didn't feel like I could tell them about the things I did, why I did them, because then I would just get punished. So
exactly. Yeah, and healthy parenting, you want to encourage your kid to understand values and use words to explain and to, of course, role model healthy behavior. But, when you said I was a misbehaved kid, even before you talked about being abused, kids are rowdy and this is normal. Play is supposed to be, there's this plague. Everyone has ADHD. It's like, no, that's how the brain evolves to learn how to focus, to be, very active and,
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to go back to your story. I'm fascinated. I've never learned there was a Christian-esque group going around with children, training children how to be more effective communicators. Can you say anything more about what, they obviously were trying to make you proselytizers, I guess, right? Evangelists.
Yeah. Yeah. So the organization, it was called Communicators for Christ. It's still around today. It's now called the Institute for Cultural Communicators. They pivoted a little bit. They now will go to pretty much any type of school. So they kind of took some of the religious aspects out, and then that enabled them to expand their business into like public and private schools that were not necessarily, into the ideology.
In retrospect, are they good people, or they just are making a lot of money and they have found a little niche?
That's a great question. There's a lot of emotional enmeshment in that organization, like for the years that I was involved, because it was very personal. It was a bunch of us in a motorhome, like in very close quarters. We didn't have our parents, and so the people that ran the organization, like, they became pseudo parents, but they weren't parents. And so I have a lot of appreciation and gratitude, like, for what it gave me, because as someone who was back then very shy and not confident and struggled with a lot of things, like, it did give me the ability to think through complicated topics and express myself. And so that is a very important thing to learn. At the same time, they weren't giving me those skills to better myself or, improve the world or anything. They were giving me those skills so that I could recruit other people and make them the foot soldiers.
Yeah, no, I get it.
So
I would have.
It's
This
is a problem with a lot of youth organizations in evangelicalism, is that a lot of youth organizations will give children these experiences where they get a little bit of autonomy and agency that they don't normally have in their families. And so they experience some of these organizations in a pretty positive way without realizing all the undertone and all the what's really going into it. And so it's hard to separate like the
Right.
parts you appreciate from the parts that you know were truly bad.
Yeah. Ryan, can I just circle back for a minute? Because forgive me, I'm a therapist by training, and that's how my mind works. When I hear someone say I was abused as a child, so I was acting out, at what point did you tell your parents you had been abused, or did you not?
I didn't tell them as a child. I didn't feel safe or comfortable with them. I mean, we were spanked from an early age, and so my parents, throughout my childhood, I saw them more as authority figures. I didn't see them as people that I could go to with.
Did you tell anybody? Did you tell any of your
I
siblings,
told
or you just
my older
held the
brother.
secret?
In general, is something I kept to myself. When I became an adult, I did try to talk to them about it. That didn't really go particularly well. So that has caused a rift between us in the last like decade or so. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
So sorry for what you had to go through. So fast forward, as you matured, you had more perspective, you learned skills for how to communicate. Tell us how, the steps of your evolution to your good work now.
Yeah. So I spent my whole high school doing speech and debate as a competitor and teacher. And then in college, I continued to coach. I really enjoyed that aspect of the.
Did you go to a Christian college, Ryan?
I did go to Christian college. I went to a little school in Eugene, Oregon called Gutenberg College. It's not just religious, it was also primarily homeschoolers that were attending. So a lot like, not sure if you've heard of Patrick Henry College on the East Coast, which is run by Michael Ferris, who's the founder of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, which is the main lobbying organization for homeschoolers. So he's the big leader. He founded a college on the East Coast, and it is one that caters specifically to people that were homeschooled. So the vast majority of the people at this school, and then the one I attended to, came from a very sheltered conservative background. Gutenberg was a great book school. So while it was religious, it was also, there were not a lot of like lectures and textbooks. We would read books and discuss them, and that was kind of the extent of it. So I did coach speech and debate while I was at that college, and then after I graduated from undergrad, I was curious about other belief systems. This wasn't the most popular path for me at the time, but at Gutenberg, we focused on what we called Western civilization. The whole education was based on the great texts of the West. And so my mind, which is just always going, I was like, okay, so if this is the West, then there must be the East. And I was like, what are the great texts of the East? I was like, I mean, there must exist.
Right.
And so I researched it. I only found one school called St. John's College that used the same model of education that Gutenberg did, where you read these texts and discuss them. And so that school was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Despite being called St. John's, it's not religious. It's purely secular. And it was at St. John's, which it was the first time in my life that I was away from my family. I was away from my community. No one knew me. No one was going to be there to tell me what to believe or how to act. And it was like the first week of classes. I remember I was just sitting outside watching the sunset, and I felt like it was a very like somatic experience. Like I felt all my like beliefs just kind of like slip physically out of my body. And I realized, damn, I don't know who I am or what I believe or what I'm supposed to do. But that was from the lack of that constant pressure and people around just tell me who I am and what I mean and what to do.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, no, you're describing, I've heard so many people born in authoritarian families or religious groups say the same thing, that at a certain point they go, if I take out everything that they tried to indoctrinate me with, I don't know what I believe.
mm-hmm,
You know, I don't know who I
yeah,
am. They say, Steve, who am I? You had a self at 19 before you got into the Moonies to go back to. I don't have anything. And it's a very different form of therapeutic approach with someone born into a group
mm-hmm,
that requires more complexity. But a big piece is just explaining, like, what would a normal, healthy family childhood have looked like?
mm-hmm,
You know, there would not be corporal punishment. There would be play and imagination and exposure to lots of different cultures and religions and information, and encouraging the child to have curiosity and learn, and not, indoctrinate the kid to have the proper beliefs and the proper behaviors, or else,
yeah,
we'll beat the crap out of you, or we'll throw you out if you express, any gay tendencies or anything like that.
mm-hmm,
It's a lot of that homophobia that
yeah,
causes people to exit. At a certain point, they're like, I can't do this anymore.
yeah, yeah. So that was my first year out of undergrad, and I I later look back at that and see it as this moment where I could let go and something that was actually liberating to me personally. At the time, it
Yeah,
wasn't. At the time, it was just kind of like the disintegration of a self and having no support around to figure out how to reassemble myself. And so
right.
that began several years of struggle. Like my mental health issues came to the forefront. I got into substances, and
Mm.
that
At
was a
what
few.
point did you started seeing a therapist? Did you? I hope at some point.
I've been seeing a therapist now for quite a few years, but I didn't do that until I think it was early 30s. So there was a good
Wow.
10 years before that happened.
Wow.
Yeah. Uh, but at that time, you know, therapy especially for someone who was formerly evangelical, like, it just what didn't come to mind. Like, when I was
I
a kid, I
understand.
had depression from trauma, of course. And I remember my primary care doctor told my parents that they should put me on some medication, and they never did. They thought that they could deal with it through prayer, and
Did your family do faith healing? Did they pray over you if you were not feeling well or anything like that?
they didn't do faith healing. They did generally believe in medication for physical things, but I don't think that they see mental health as physical. That's kind of with the
Right,
theme in evangelicalism of mental health. So,
right.
uh, I struggled for quite a few years, and when I started to get my life back together, I started reconnecting with the people that I knew from high school and college that had been homeschooled too. And as we were talking, I just kept seeing patterns. Like I kept seeing that we're struggling with the same things. We came from different families, but we're all struggling with these same questions and these same mental health issues. And there's so much that we're not talking about, that we weren't allowed to talk about. Like
Right.
some of my friends were, self-injuring since they were in high school. Like that's not something that anyone talks about in homeschooling. You know, the few of us that use substances. And that was always under the table. There were no, awareness programs for homeschoolers on drugs or, on mental health or the sort of support systems that I don't know how common they are anymore, but that we used to have in public schools when there was dedication to, services for
Sure.
students. And so as I was talking to my friends and realizing that there was so much that was similar with our stories, I wanted to create a way for us to share them. One thing about
Mm-hmm.
homeschooling is that everyone always tries to put on their best face. Like, homeschoolers do
Sure.
not want to admit that they have problems. They want to have that perfect smiling family. They don't want people to think they struggle. They're worried that if they admit that they're not perfect, that the government's going to come take away their kids. And so there is a lot of pressure to say things are okay, especially for the kids.
Yeah.
As children, we're often paraded around in front of media or government even. We have days where we go to our legislators, and our parents would have us tell the legislators how great homeschooling was. And we'd be interviewed, we'd say we love homeschooling. But I mean, I never went to public school or private school. I had no idea what anything else would be like. So,
Right. Exactly.
yeah.
Can I ask another quick
Mm-hmm.
question? So, the internet got introduced in the 90s. Were you just reading physical books before the internet happened? Tell us about where in the evolution of the internet and then where the internet now fits with modern
Mm-hmm.
homeschooling, if people are even allowed to be
Yeah.
online without supervision.
Yeah, I would say that back then it was very unique because the internet was new. Parents were concerned about certain things on the internet, but there didn't exist anything to do something about it really either. Like, there weren't those, nowadays they have Covenant Eyes, the things that block the explicit websites, but also any website the parents want to block. They didn't have those technologies. And so the internet did become very significant for homeschoolers, the children, and then later as alumni, because we were able to stay connected with one another and share our experiences. Back then, we didn't think to connect and create a network or do something about those similarities, but you were able to connect with people that you never would have otherwise, because so many homeschooling families are insular. They don't want you to mingle with people who are not like them. And so,
Right.
while some homeschoolers don't interact with anyone outside their family, some do, but the socialization that happens is still just like a white evangelical kid with another white evangelical kid. Like,
Right.
it's not someone in their family, but it's still someone just like them. So,
Right. And I guess I also want to add, I have at least one close friend who is not religious at all. He grew up in England, but he is brilliant. He's on the autism spectrum, but he's absolutely brilliant. And he has a sleep phase disorder where he goes to sleep at 4 a.m. and sleeps till noon, and trying to go to normal public school never worked for him and such. And he, was basically homeschooled and homeschooled his kids, and they're brilliant and they're very educated in how to research.
mm-hmm.
But it sounds very different from this ideological, pure Christian, fundamentalism angle.
Yeah, it's very different. And homeschooling has been very diverse from the very beginning. There have always been those liberal and progressive and parents that have been wanting to do their best for their kids. And homeschooling is, whether it's good or bad, it's very, very powerful, because what it does is it gives parents pretty much like 99% absolute control over their kids. And
Sure.
so if you use that power in a, helpful and empowering way, it can be amazing. Like it can be
Yeah.
superior to public school, like, because you're getting individualized attention. I mean, and you're getting the support from your
Right.
parents, everything you need to excel in a normal educational environment. But it also can be the very opposite, which is if those parents want to use that control or power to abuse their kids and keep their kids away from mandatory reporters, anyone that would see what's going on in the family.
Let
That's
me
the power.
interrupt you and just say mandatory reporters are designated by the government and by states. If you are aware a child is being abused, you have to report it.
Yes.
If you suspect it, you have to. So, the issue with sexual abuse, for example, if you're in a public school and the child is acting differently and is depressed and then reveals they had been abused, they have to report the abuse to the authorities. Whereas in these private environments, there's no mandatory reporting.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And you didn't even feel safe enough to tell them.
Yeah.
So that's another big important point I want to underscore, that in these authoritarian environments, children feel like it's their fault, they did something wrong, and they're going to get punished if they reveal somebody, abused them.
Yeah. And
it's terrible.
Yeah. And then there's actually an additional layer, which is that for evangelical homeschooling families, there is a whole culture of fear around child protection, and any sort of helping professional. So if you are an outsider, if you're a social worker, if you're a public school teacher, if you are a doctor or a nurse, really anyone that is, as you were describing, required by law to report a suspicion of abuse, any of those people in those professions could be interfering with the family. And so that is seen as a potential threat, or a very real threat.
And should I assume that the belief is it's Satan or the enemy?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Did you also hear that Armageddon was coming at any moment and your salvation was at risk? Was that the part of your childhood indoctrination?
It was. In multiple ways. We did have the rapture, which is the idea of the world ending and God coming back to bring the good people up to heaven and punish all the bad people. That was certainly something that was said would happen frequently, and it never did, of course. We also had Y2K. That was, homeschoolers were all about prepping for Y2K.
We have to explain that for people who don't remember. But that was back in the computer age. It was supposedly going to cause some type of a major catastrophe, that the clocks on the computers would run out of dates or whatever. And we thought, this was the millennium and it was going to be the end times and all that kind of stuff was Y2K.
And that was very first significant for evangelicals, because they thought that if society collapsed, so if our electricity and power went out, obviously there'd have to be something that rises to take power over. And so they saw that as this very significant opportunity. Like it could be this moment where all the secular aspects of our government collapse, and then a new order of righteous evangelicals can take over. There's some actually very strong parallels to the collapse of certain institutions we're seeing right now, where it's kind of exactly what they were hoping for back in the year 2000, what we're seeing. So
yeah, they're involved in what's happening in 2025 for sure.
Yeah.
Were your parents part of the prepper movement? Do they store food and guns? And
they weren't they weren't super preppers, primarily because we were not the most well-to-do family, but our best friends at the time, who lived up in the hills in San Jose, and their dad was a computer tech, so they were very well-to-do, and they had the giant tanks of water. They had their multiple storage, not bins, but sheds. They had everything. So there were numerous people that paired up and were like, okay, if the world collapses, we're going to all work together.
So they would allow you on their property and share what they've been storing. Mm-hmm. Well, that was nice. Yeah. Yep.
So
wow. Wow.
So I started hearing everyone's stories after college, and then I wanted to create a way for us to share our stories, because as we've been talking about, we weren't able to. We had to pretend like things were okay. And so saying no, homeschooling wasn't a positive thing for me, or my parents were abusive, anything like that, is very not said, but it's also scary for us to say, because those communities are very reactive.
Sure.
When you question those things that aren't supposed to be questioned, then they lash out. And but still felt like we had to do it. And so I got a group of it was a few dozen homeschool alumni and myself, and we created a website, an organization called Homeschoolers Anonymous. And it was...
Did you identify yourself just out of curiosity, or at the beginning was it anonymous?
Most of the folks were anonymous. I always identify myself. And part of the reason for that is that because my homeschooling experience, the education aspect, I felt was better than a lot of my friends, I felt like I was privileged in some ways, and I wanted to use that privilege to help my friends. And so as someone that could kind of stand in between the homeschooling parents and leaders, and then all these people that had truly negative abusive experiences, I could kind of stand in the middle and kind of take some of the
kudos to you, my brother.
So, thank you.
I have so much respect. I mean, you're a whistleblower. That's how I think of you, honestly, a survivor and a whistleblower. Hey, people, let's pull back the curtain. They're trying to represent this as the perfect way to raise children, and it isn't, especially, if there's no checks and balances, and this is black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil, and the outside world is evil.
Yeah.
Man, if you're depressed, no, you can't take medication or see a therapist. So your book is called The Kingdom of Children, a Liberation Theology. Tell us more.
Yeah. So after I started Homeschoolers Anonymous, after several years of advocacy, we turned it into several nonprofit organizations. And I wanted to become better equipped to do the work I was doing. So I went back to school and I got a master's in child protection. And while I was studying for that master's, I just kept coming across the same problem, which is that everything that I was learning that were best practices for child protection and child development and parenting, anything to do with kids, they were all in diametric opposition to what's taught in evangelicalism when it comes to families and parenting. And so I thought there has to be a different way that we can look at religious texts, ideas of God, and relate them to children and families in a way that's not abusive and controlling, that would instead be, healthy and empowering for children. And so my mind went to liberation theology, because when I was in undergrad, a friend introduced me to a book called A Theology of Liberation. And it blew my mind. For those who aren't familiar with liberation theology, it started in Latin America. There's a Peruvian priest, Gustavo
I was going to
Gutierrez.
say, wasn't it a Catholic movement at
Mm-hmm.
first of,
Yeah.
against authoritarianism and
Mm-hmm.
dictatorships?
Yes. So it started there, came to the United States. Some Black theologians picked it up here, James Cone, and it's spread all over the country. And there's different types of liberation theology. So any group of people that's experienced marginalization or abuse or oppression or violence, there's a liberation theology for them that's created by them, that's made for them, that is supposed to be helping them deal with their current circumstances and liberating them from them. It's not just about believing God and going to heaven. It's about you actually need to make the world a better place right now. And so I thought, oh, there's got to be some books on doing that with regards to children, liberating children from abuse and violence. But there weren't really. I looked it up and
So
I
you
found
wrote
this.
it.
Yeah, I found one book in 1991 that was written by a woman named Janet Pice, and it's just a small book. No one had written a review on it. Like there were no Amazon reviews. Pice is actually, I found out later, a pseudonym. Like that's not her name. So there's like nothing I could find on this person. But the book was amazing and made me think of all the possibilities that could happen. And so I spent the next few years thinking about this topic and trying to think about how can I take all I've learned from liberation theology and all I've learned about child protection and parenting in healthy ways, and how can I bring them together? And that led to the Kingdom of Children.
So awesome. So my question is, I know there's a vast number of kids who are raised in these Christian evangelical homeschool, but there are many people raised in cults like the Children of God or Scientology or the Moonies. I'm imagining people who are now exiting those groups would appreciate reading your book. Am I correct?
Absolutely. I think that the principles that are there are relevant for any context in which there are children. I'm not even though the book is theological and from a Christian perspective, it's not dogmatic or fundamentalist. And so I wouldn't say there's anything in the text that would preclude someone outside of those perspectives from using it. In fact, I would thoroughly welcome it. And I think it would be amazing to see other groups, other religions start thinking about how they can use their own faith to actually help children in the same way.
Yeah, amazing. It's great. So, I mean, I've always, as the therapist, learning all these different models for how to make a healthy self, and parents aren't taught how to be good parents. A lot of people just parent the way they were parented, and maybe they'll overcompensate. If they're overly strict parents, they may be underly structured, and vice versa. There's no real best practices for how to raise healthy children. I mean, there are now, but in general, I think if people get married and intend to have a family, they should get licensed just like they get a driving license. They should learn how to listen, how to talk, how to ask questions, and not be so perfectionistic, like there's a perfect way of doing anything.
Exactly. I think there's a lot that we can learn about how we interact with children that are relevant to other contexts. I think that if we can interact with people who are less powerful than us in kind and respectful ways, and if we can remove the violent tendencies in our lives, then we can lead to a better world for everyone. Like, you know, nonviolent communication is really important with children, but it's also super important just really in any relationship, right?
Totally.
So a lot of these skills, like nonviolent communication or learning how to de-escalate a situation, I think they're really just everyday life skills. So even if you're not a parent, or even if you don't work with children, I think it's really important to actually think about those questions and think about how you interact and relate to other people, especially if they don't have as much power and privilege as you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So if I can cut to the chase, if I may, if you had the power, which you don't, but if you had the power to recreate homeschooling in an ideal sense, tell us what that would look like and what would changes would need to be implemented. I mean, I would assume there would need to be some standards of regulation for
Mm-hmm.
best practices of do's and don'ts, but tell us your prescription for what a healthy homeschooling, is about.
Absolutely. I think that there are two things that need to happen. One is we do need to have standards, like you mentioned. There need to be checks and balances. Like a lot of people freak out about when you mention standards or regulation or oversight because they think of the government overbearing. But we need checks and balances in a democracy. We need no one group should have all the power, and so we all understand the government shouldn't have all the power over kids, but we have a harder time thinking that parents shouldn't.
Right.
Like there should be a check and balance on the parents, and so we do need in homeschooling to have some standards. There need to be laws that require some sort of interaction with someone outside the family.
Right.
It doesn't have to be an intrusive home visit, but it needs to be like take your kid to the doctor. You don't have to
Right.
take your kid to the doctor legally when you're homeschooling them. So there needs to be a way to get the children to be interacting with people outside of the home. And then the other thing that needs to be done is that homeschoolers themselves are going to have to make some changes. And that, if they don't, the government eventually is going to legislate them. But it's really important because laws and regulations aren't going to reach every kid, right? Like some of these families are off the grid, and once you pass laws, they're going to go more off the grid. And so the homeschooling community itself needs to take the fact that there is abuse and neglect in their communities seriously, and they need to start doing something about it. They need to have child protection policies in their co-ops and organizations. They need to do background checks when they hire teachers for their groups. They should be, making sure that, if like Homeschool Legal Defense Association, which is the lobbying organization I mentioned earlier, they have a membership program.
Mm-hmm.
When people become members of their organizations, like they should require the parents to go through a child abuse prevention class. Like
Great idea.
there are all these simple things we can do that don't even require laws. All it requires is people actually caring and making some effort. And so we really need to see that effort begin. We've been talking about the abuse and neglect that's going on in these communities now for over a decade, and still we're not seeing child protection policies. Like that's kind of the 101 stuff. Like if you have kids in an organization, you need to have a protection policy.
Right.
So
did you
we
write
need those
something up
internal
yet?
changes and then also the external changes.
Yeah. Have you written up something like a document that describes what people should adopt?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of like the legislative, what we need to do with regards to standards, one of the organizations I helped found, the Coalition for Responsible Home Education, they have a model piece of legislation that's called the Make Homeschool Safe Act. And that just has all of the best practices we've learned through our work in terms of what would be the basics to protect children in homeschooling communities.
Great. So we're going to do a blog on this interview, and we'll add links to all your organizations and to anything that needs to be made more public.
Awesome. Thank you.
To shed a light on this.
And then on the, the internal change side, like, I did develop, as you mentioned earlier, a child abuse prevention training class specifically for homeschoolers. It has a teacher's guide as well as participant guides. It's all free. You can get it and download it. There's instructions for how to run the class itself, what to do beforehand to organize it and make it successful. So I would say the models and the resources are out there. It just needs to be known and then actually acted on. Yeah.
Right. So in the work that you've put together, it sounds like a lot of it is written and not necessarily videotapes of you describing it and teaching it, or is that a part of it as well?
I would say like most of the time, this has been, internet advocacy, and so it had been pre-video. So a lot of it is textual. I have been doing a lot more videos the last couple of years, and I think that's where things are moving to. So I actually think that that's vital. Like a lot of the work that's being done on evangelicalism, on homeschooling, but also on like Christian nationalism, Christo-fascism. There's great stuff, deep analysis, awesome scholars, but figuring out how to get that into those accessible, bite-size, and viral moments, without losing the content, without losing that analysis and logic, is going to be really key. If we have to figure out.
So, do you know Monty Mader by any chance? Have you heard of Monty Mader?
Mm-hmm.
MonteMader. Look her up. Last I noticed, she had 1.6 million followers on Instagram. I know you're on Instagram. But I mentioned her earlier in this podcast, where she was like beaten by her father, alienated from her mother, and made to memorize the scripture. And she's just so smart. She's also a singer and songwriter, but she's a major activist, and she is constantly talking about how horrible Christian nationalism is and was, because she believed it 100%. And now she like dresses witchy and just is like in total rebellion against her upbringing, basically. But she would really love to meet you and read you, and she knows she's really good at social media, way better than me. I mean, I have a big following relative, but not nearly as big as her. But she's brilliant and beautiful, and she would just love your work.
I'll check her out then. Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
I'm a big advocate for survivors to share their stories and just normalize that, hey, you're not alone.
Absolutely.
I had it too. Yeah. There's life after, authoritarian religion experience or family experience, etc. And let's make a life that we want to live, Let's figure out who we want to be and what our purpose is, on earth. Yeah. Go for it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I'm honored to know you and encourage you on my platform to hopefully make more people aware of you. And like I said, we'll be doing a blog, and we'll list all your social media. I made sure I'm following you on your social media, so we're linked. And when this comes out, we'll share, and you'll be a collaborator on our social media stuff. And I have a team that will take clips of you and me, making a point, and hopefully, it's a bottom up movement as I see it. It's how change is going to happen, is just getting more and more people who care and who are brave, who are willing to step up and say, hey, I want other kids to not have to go through what I went through. I
Exactly.
want other people to have a healthier experience than I did.
Yeah. I'd say that's the thing that I took the most from Homeschoolers Anonymous, the most powerful thing is just the realization that one, I'm not crazy, and two, I'm not alone. Like knowing that there are real reasons for why things hurt me, and knowing that those same things hurt other people. Like those two truths and pieces of information can keep me going and can fuel me. Like that is
Totally.
very important to know and to have that community too.
And we haven't used the T word yet, but I want to use it now. Mm-hmm. You had trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And, Judith Herman, the famous psychiatrist who wrote Trauma in Recovery, said the most important thing is for trauma survivors to be able to tell their story and be believed.
Mm-hmm.
To not keep the story inside, because then you're like, I'm just nuts, it's me. I deserved all this punishment and all of this abuse. And it's like, no, you didn't deserve any of it. This is part of the human condition. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of sick people out there, and they take advantage of the vulnerabilities and susceptibilities of young people.
Mm-hmm.
They don't honor young people as the next generation that, and they should.
Yeah.
And they must. So last words to you, my brother. Pleasure to know you.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you having me on here. I really appreciate all the work you've been doing. I think I first started following you from when I was researching Robert J. Lifton, because his concept of totalism, that helped me understand a lot in homeschooling. The way that those authoritarian environments work. I think that's where I first encountered your work, and I think it's really important because I can notice patterns in homeschooling, but you have been able to see those patterns in so many other environments too, and so having that holistic perspective is
but if you've written up his 8 criteria on homeschooling, I think we should add a link to it in the blog, because that would be valuable.
Yeah,
he's the person who I credit the most for my career, because as an ex-Moonie, he was like, you should study psychology. What you experience is much more sophisticated than what I studied. And he just passed away at age 99. I don't know if you were aware.
No, I didn't know
that. He just passed away. There'll be a memorial that his family is having for him, I believe November 7th. But I've had many interviews with him. If you haven't watched, go to my YouTube channel. Okay. He's got long white hair, but he was very coherent to almost the end, where he wrote a book about Trump and Losing Reality, it was called. And he did a lot of very great work. And my bite model, evolved out of my studying with him and Margaret Singer and Lewis West, etc. So Ryan Stollar wrote the book, The Kingdom of Children, a Liberation Theology. He's got a master's degree. He's done so much good work. Created the viral website Homeschoolers Anonymous. You're a child protection advocate and want to encourage everyone to learn how to raise healthy kids and protect them from predators and abuse. And let me state again, corporal punishment is abuse. So anyone who's hitting their child thinking they're doing a good thing for them, stop it. And if you need journal references on fMRI studies of children who've been beaten, I can supply those, because most civilized countries have abolished child punishment, corporal punishments. They recognize the science of it. So thank you, Ryan Stollar.
You're very
Let's
welcome,
stay in
Steve.
touch.
Yes, would love to.
Take care. Bye.